What about I mean, a subject that touch what we were talking about, but different in the way. Want to hear your opinion about the Wagner polemic in Israel. Have you ever thought about that?
Yes, I have, and I have a great deal of respect for Chaim Gantz, who has written about this at some length. I think that there are understandable historical and political reasons why Wagner is not played in Israel, and I, broadly speaking, agree with Chaim's position, which is that while there are survivors of the Holocaust among us, and it is their wish that Wagner should not be played, one should respect that wish. But in the broader sense of should one censor or suppress anti-Semitic works, my position is essentially no. One shouldn't, and I draw
under no circumstances.
Well, only under the most extremely narrowly defined circumstances. I don't take an absolutist First Amendment style position, although Americans don't take absolutist First Amendment style positions either. Yeah. There is always the exception for the man who shouts fire in a crowded theatre, which is, of course, the classic crux for the limitation of freedom of expression. But overall, no. I make a distinction between, which is it's a slightly hard distinction, because the sound is so similar, between censorship, which is about suppressing, and censorship, which is with a U rather than an O, which is a critical, adversarial, even condemnatory engagement with the work.
Which is sort of a personal choice.
Yes, because I think that the way in which the Americans put it, the American jurists put it, is the answer to hate speech. An anti-Semitic language is a form of hate speech. Yeah. The answer to hate speech is not less speech, but more speech. In other words, you respond to hate speech with a speech of your own, which situates it, identifies it as objectionable, and dismisses it, so to speak, in an engagement of language rather than coercively with repression.
Unless we're dealing with certain expressions that are totally banned, like denying the Holocaust.
Well, I'm not in favor of criminalizing Holocaust denial. I would not ban it. But again, I understand why in Germany, for example, just as the swastika is banned and the Hitler salute is banned, I would understand why they would want to ban Holocaust denial, because it's part of a larger coming to terms with the past, and Holocaust denial would impede that. So I think that freedom of speech is a value which has to compete with other values in any national society, and in some national societies it will lose, but for a short time, that competition.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that in general you certainly don't recommend banning T.S. Eliot, nor I guess any other writer?
No, no.
So the way to address anti-Semitic expression is to write about them?
Yes.
In this adversarial reading or writing that you actually practice?
Yes, or to litigate over them.
Or to litigate.
I mean, to go back to the Irving case.
Yes.
I mean, Irving sued Lippstadt. Irving was trying to suppress Lippstadt's book, which is interesting. It wasn't Lippstadt trying to suppress Irving's writings, but the way in which we dealt with Irving was not to defend Lippstadt's book, but rather to attack Irving's.
He brought the law into it.
Yes, he brought the law into it, and we used the law then to discredit him. And the consequence of the trial is that such reputation as he had, I think, he lost. And he was seen by a much wider audience for being the bogus dishonest historian that many of us already knew he was, but it was a secret, so to speak, between a small group of people. The secret was blown. Irving's secret was blown as a result of the trial.
When we are talking about anti-Semitic great writers, I think it's inevitable not to talk about Shakespeare. So let's talk about Shakespeare.
Okay.
Let's talk about The Merchant of Venice, about Shylock, to be exact. The overt anti-Semitism in The Merchant of Venice, I think, is still shocking.
Yes.
Still provoking.
Yes.
Yet no one will seriously claim that it should be banned.
No.
More than that, perhaps the figure of Shylock defies anti-Semitism. I mean, makes us realize how absurd it is, how dangerous, how trivial. What do you think about Shylock? And about Shakespeare and Shylock?
Let me give an answer in parts.
Sure.
The first thing I think about Shylock is what I think about English literary anti-Semitism in general, which is its uniqueness in the world canon of literary anti-Semitism.
Yeah, we have Dickens.
We have Fagin, and we have Shylock, and we have Svengali. Exactly, three world-class mythical literary figures. I mean, English literature is
that survived during the centuries.
Yes, English literature
still icons of Jews.
Indeed, yeah. Indeed. English literature is a fantastically powerful literature. Anyway, we have other mythical characters like Robinson Crusoe, for example, or Hamlet.
Almost any Shakespearean character.
Yes, the Spaniards have Don Quixote, the French have, hard to say, but in terms of kind of globally significant individual characters, the kind
Madame
of
Bovary,
Madame Bovary, Madame Bovary, yes. Tartuffe, perhaps.
Of course, yes.
I'm not serious really when I'm obviously I'm not speaking dismissively of the whole canon of French literature. What strikes me though is how very pregnant English literature is with the notion of literary character. It's what is specific, I think, to English literature, the immense attention that English literature pays to character as opposed to narrative.
Yeah, and that's why those characters are still very much alive.
Yes. Yes.
Powerful.
Yes.
And
there
perhaps dangerous.
Indeed, there's a study to be written of the relationship between narrative and character in different national literary traditions, and I think that
would be challenging.
It would be a challenge, and certainly not for me. But it may be that the conclusion that person came to, who undertook that investigation, would be that in English literature, character is privileged over narrative, and that's why, in a way, the characters can be liberated from the confines of the works in which they appear and to lead a kind of independent life. In any event, that's the first thing I wanted to say. Shylock and Fagin are part of a larger body of English literary characters who live outside the confines of their literary works. The second thing I would say is that, and I've been studying the anti-Semitism in the Islamic world recently, I am struck by the frequency with which Shylock is used as a literary trope for Islamic invective directed at the Jewish state. So plainly, there is a use to which that character is being put, which is very alarming, and I think it's consistent with the character, so to speak, as it exists inside the play. I don't think the appropriation by anti-Semites of Shakespeare's character is a misappropriation. I think they are interpreting him and the play correctly.
Yes, but human rights also can make use of Shylock. I mean, he's such an intricate character.
Yes.
You can see his point. You can identify with Shylock.
Yes, yes,
No, his famous monologue
because he's a human being who's wronged.
Yes.
But the point
and
about
you can sense very strongly
Yes,
that
you
he
can.
was wronged, and you
Yes,
pity
you can.
him.
Yes, you can. And that's partly because The Merchant of Venice comes out of a developing literary genre of the revenge tragedy. And what is the revenge tragedy? It's a story of a man who avenges a wrong done to him, or more typically to a member of his family. The point about The Merchant of Venice is, first of all, that Shylock goes too far. His revenge is disproportionate to the injury done to him.
That reminds the new doctrine of Israeli Supreme Court.
Yes, proportionality.
Yes.
And yes, well, it's a very important...
They took it from Shakespeare, apparently.
They derive the opposite lesson, yes, as Jews. Shylock goes too far.
But his
far
writing
too far.
principle.
Well, no, because I think the principle the principle is erased by the disproportionality of his response.
The principle is never go too far, or something.
Well, because it ceases to be a justifying principle. Then, if I kill somebody because that person, says something rude
Provoked
to
me.
There's no principle that could justify that. That's the first. The second thing is, Shakespeare turns the genre of the revenge tragedy into a comedy, and that's very striking, because what he does is he diminishes the dignity of Shylock's revenge. And you can see the way he does that by comparing him and the play with Othello. Othello's reaction is similarly disproportionate, but so to speak, he is allowed to kill himself at the end of the fifth act. He is given the dignity of a fifth act death. Shylock, by contrast, is dismissed at the end of the fourth act with his life.
Yeah, but he didn't kill. Othello did kill.
He didn't kill, but he sought to kill.
Yes.
And that's part of the comedy, that he failed. And what's very interesting about the way in which The Merchant of Venice then plays out in English culture is that it's a reminder to Jews, it's a reminder to English people that, notwithstanding the malicious and sinister nature of Jewish conspiracies, they can be defeated. And that is
Very comforting.
It's immensely comforting, and it explains, not entirely, but in part, why English anti-Semitism has never been quite so pernicious, or anything like as pernicious, as the anti-Semitisms of other countries.
It's not as threatening as
No,
other
because
sort of fear.
because the English have got the measure of the Jews and know that they can defeat them. After all, you cannot expel the Jews as the British did in 1290, and yet at the same time be frightened by them.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about anti-Semitism in England. As you just mentioned, the Jews were expelled from England in 1919, but centuries passed, and since then anti-Semitism had not been a programmatic issue in England, I think. I believe there are not, for example, anti-Semitic political parties in England. There are not anti-Semitic political aims, I think. Is there yet anti-Semitism in England at all? Is there perhaps I'll ask in another way, is there a collective perception of Jew or Jewishness in England?
The answer to your last question is yes. If I then step back and consider your earlier question, I would answer it like this.
Okay.
I would say that I would answer it in this way, I think. First of all, I would say there is no such single thing as anti-Semitism. There is a whole congerie of anti-Semitisms that are related through an intricate network of family resemblances. The Voltairean anti-Semitism of the Enlightenment is not the same as the Streicher anti-Semitism of the Third Reich, and the anti-Semitism of St. John Chrysostom, the early church father, is not the same as the anti-Semitism of Houston Stewart Chamberlain or the other racist, proto-racist anti-Semites of the 19th century. So you have to recognize, one has to recognize those differences. Now, given that, the next question that arises is, what are the English differentia? And I think there are 4 different kinds of English anti-Semitism. The first is the medieval kind, which was programmatic and which was lethal in its execution. The blood libel was invented in England in 1144. It's had an immense history. What one might say is that England exports its anti-Semitic inventions. It's exported the blood libel. It's exported the principle of expulsion.
Successfully.
Indeed, it's exported the principle of restrictive discriminatory legislation as well. England was the most zealous of all the nations in Western Europe in enforcing the church legislation of the Lateran councils.
But it is ancient history.
It's ancient history, and yet it resonates. And why does it resonate? Because it lives in English literary anti-Semitism, which is the second kind. English literary anti-Semitism begins with the ballad Little Sir Hugh of Lincoln, which is a ballad that came into existence around the 13th century, 13th, 14th century, and it was a poem that recited in highly abstract form the Lincoln blood libel of 1255. Now, English literary anti-Semitism is an endless revisiting of details of the blood libel. Chaucer rewrote the blood libel in his Canterbury Tales and the Prioress's Tale. Shakespeare rewrites the blood libel in The Merchant of Venice. After all, it's the story of a predatory Jew who has designs on the life of an exemplary Gentile. Oliver Twist is another version of the blood libel. Fagin traps the Gentile child, Oliver Twist, threatens his life, and it's only by a miracle that Oliver is rescued. So that medieval English anti-Semitism, which in one sense came to an end on the expulsion, lives in English literary anti-Semitism, and it is not purely historic, partly because Shylock is endlessly reperformed, and Oliver Twist is endlessly adapted for TV and stage and film and so on, but also it continues to create new literary works. There is a poet living and working in Britain at the moment called Tom Paulin, and he wrote a poem which was published in a national newspaper only 2 or 3 years ago called Crossfire, in which he says the IDF soldiers are like SS officers and they seek out Palestinian children to kill them.
Yes.
This is a classic restatement of the blood libel, and it shows the resilience of English literary anti-Semitism. That's the second kind. The third kind is the kind that I think you were referring to, and that is the non-programmatic, merely social anti-Semitism of snobbery.
Yeah, a little covert.
Yes,
perhaps.
social exclusion. It's an anti-Semitism of the remark. And the fourth kind, which is not altogether English in its provenance, but it's more European, is what we might call anti-Semitic anti-Zionism, but it has a particular English inflection in its history because of the imperial burden in England of the mandate and the history of the mandate. Now, so if I can return to your question, which is what is the nature of English anti-Semitism, I would say it is, if you like, a mixture, a kind of cocktail of the literary, the everyday or social, and the anti-Semitic anti-Zionist. And that third element of the anti-Semitic anti-Zionist is becoming stronger and stronger, and it is making anti-Semitism programmatic. And the evidence for that is in the movement to boycott Israel's universities.
Yeah. Do you perceive the initiative that indeed came from England to academic boycott as a symptom, as a clear symptom of this fourth strand of anti-Semitism? Or perhaps a combination of all the four?
I consider the boycott movement to be anti-Semitic in effect, if not in intention. It is stigmatizing Israel for absolutely no good reason. And Israel has become, so to speak, the Jew among the nations.
And my last question, since we seem to run out of time, what can be done and what should be done about it?
Well, one fights it, one resists it in whatever way that one can, while at the same time trying to ensure that it doesn't become an obsession and distract us from our more worthwhile projects.
So you personally fight it in court and write about it in your
books? But I also try to lead a normal life, because otherwise one becomes a professional anti-Semite, and that's to lead a life in the shadows of someone else's hatred.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jolius. I enjoyed our talk. Thank you for having me. We have to go on talking because there's
okay.
Well,
yes. It went very quickly.
Yes, very quickly. I have some more questions.